We're going to talk about our Generation 2 LSJK harness and how to lay it out. This is a 5.3 engine that we use for testing our harnesses, test running them. So let's start on the driver's side, that is if you're not in Australia, with the ECM connectors. This is the E38 ECM, and along with it are these relays. These relays are going to be mounted on the ECM bracket once you get it in the vehicle. And then if you can see, there is a ground connector that's going to go to the stud on the fender well, which will ground those relays. So let's move up this main trunk, and this is where you want to start. At the top of the intake there's a T molded into this intake, and our harness fits right into that T. This will position the harness so everything will plug in properly. Now let's come down the trunk here a little. On the driver's side you've got your 4 injectors. Injector 1 has its own breakout, if you can see that. And then 2, 3, or actually that would be 3, 5, and 7 come along this log. Then you have your coil pack connector on the driver's side. Now on the other side of the trunk, on the driver's side, it breaks out into 4 more sub-harnesses. These 2 are your ground and your coolant temp sensor. Coolant temp sensor is pretty apparent. On this ground, make sure that you ground it on the head or the block. Do not ground it onto the valve cover. The valve cover is isolated with rubber and you will not get a good ground. Between this ground and an additional ground on the other side, that grounds your entire engine performance system. So we have added and beefed up our ground distribution in this Generation 2 harness. So make sure those are tight. We do include a star washer that needs to be between the terminal and the block. Now these other 2 are going to go down to your variable valve timing connector, cam sensor, crank sensor, and knock sensor. I like to route them right here behind the alternator. You can run an Adele clamp to hold them in position. Route them down and along the front of the timing cover here, and you will see that this engine has a camshaft position sensor but no variable valve timing connector. I'll show you that in a second. If you don't have variable valve timing in your engine, we will provide you with this jumper harness that will allow you to then plug into the VVT connector. Otherwise, this harness is going to come down and sit about here, and this will then have a little sub harness that comes off and connects both your cam sensor and your variable valve timing sensor, which I'll show you in a second. But before I do, the other harness comes back and around to your knock sensor and your crankshaft position sensor. Make sure if they're exposed to heat that you put some fire sleeve on them. And then finally this breakout goes to the knock sensor on the passenger side, or the driver's side. So let's go look at, not Toothless Mo, let's go look at a VVT engine so you can identify if your engine has VVT. This is a 2011 LC9. If you can see that small connector right behind the harmonic balancer, that's the cam phaser solenoid. Here's the sub harness we talked about, and there's the connector. Let's get back to the LC9. I'm sorry, this is a LY5. Let's move over to the passenger side. There's our T, where the main trunk breaks off. We're going to have our map sensor. This map sensor is rigged on here because we use different map sensors on these test engines, so yours will of course be on the intake. These 2 goes to the throttle body, throttle position sensors. That's a 6-pin connector. MAF, or MAF, M-A-F sensor. Here is injector 2, 4, 6, 8, and the coil pack connector, just as on the other side. And these injectors can turn. So turn them so that it lays your harness out so that it doesn't have any tight spots or interfere with any of the hardware. Alright, let's go back to the top again. This is where we reference everything. Our main trunk is going to come towards the back of the engine, and right about the back of the intake you're going to want to run it so that it's right between the fuel rail and the brake booster nipple. Now this brake booster nipple, this is a plug that GM supplies for their crate engines, but make sure you have a nipple on there and you connect it to your power brake booster. I like to run it right down this gap. This fuel filter will not be there on yours. We just use that for test purposes. Two connectors break out here. This is your oil pressure. This is your airfield management or AFM connector. If you don't have AFM, your engine's not equipped with it, just simply take this connector and tape it off to the harness. Make sure it's sealed well. You do have a power wire and 4 solenoid signal wires. If you do have AFM, make sure you plug this in. Even if you're not running AFM, that connector does need to be plugged in. So let's go down the harness. You're going to see 4 O2 sensor connectors. 2 are going to drop off on the driver's side, 2 are going to drop off on the passenger side. We will have them labeled for you up and down. You really can't screw up the up and down because as you can see, one's a male, one's a female. But you do need to know which side is bank 1 and which side is bank 2, and we'll have that labeled for you. Going down the harness a little bit further, we have our 6L80 connector. I want to say something about this connector. If you look at the locking ring, it needs to have that center portion recessed at least a ½ an inch, as you can see here. This locking ring will allow you to lock it if this center portion was flush with the back of the locking ring, but there would be no electrical contact. So make sure that that center portion is pushed in quite a bit, like you see here, before you turn that locking ring over. Going down the harness a little bit further, we have 2 more connectors. This 3-wire connector is your fuel tank pressure sensor. Install the fuel tank pressure sensor in the line between the fuel filler neck and the fuel tank with some 1/4 inch hose. And this is your evap vent solenoid connector, which will go on the evap canister. If your canister has been relocated to behind the axle, you may have to lengthen that. Let's go over to our E38 computer again. We've already talked about the relays coming off. So we're going to have this branch which comes off and goes to your fuse block. Now, your fuse block will be in one of our mounts that mounts onto the fender well of your JK. This is on the test engine, so it does not have that. But it's already all pre-wired. Fuses are in place. You will see 3 wires coming off on this loom, and here they are. This fusible link goes to the positive side of your battery. That's hot at all times. The pink and the blue go to your TIPM or your fuse block under the hood. The large 14-gauge blue wire powers up your fuel pump. We power the fuel pump directly from the GM computer, so if the Chrysler system were to fail, the LS would continue to run. So we bypass the TIPM. This pink wire is simply a signal wire to turn on the GM engine performance system. Once this is hot, it'll bring the GM system alive. There's one more connector we need to talk about, and that would be this one coming off the main trunk. This green wire breaking out is for your air conditioning low pressure switch. We've pre-wired that for you. All you got to do is connect it to the switch that we supply in the AC line. Following this back, this is going to route into the vehicle. You're going to have a 15-pin Molex connector. Now we put this Molex connector here because you can unplug this and then remove the body, separate it from the chassis without having to remove any of the wires. Now we're going to talk about this BCM. This particular vehicle is going to have a BCM with electronic shift, tow haul, mode, cruise control. So it has this connector that we'll talk about in another video. Otherwise, this red and green wire powers up your shift lever position board that we supply The blue wire is going to go to your brake switch. This ground wire is going to ground on the stud next to your left foot in the driver footwell. This is your data link connector, your DLC and check engine light. And then finally, the accelerator pedal position sensor. And we do supply the accelerator pedal position sensor with a mount, so it fits into your JK with some adjustability so you can tailor it to how you like it. That is the main layout of the LSJK harness, the Generation 2 harness. We'll do a separate video on the BCM and other wiring. Thanks. Alright guys, we're going to fire this thing up, check our harness out. We do this on every harness. We hook up a scanner and we run it to make sure there's no codes before we ship it. We also electronically continuity check it. So let's see if this thing wants to start up. We're going to look at our codes here. Okay, first thing we notice is this PL315 crankshaft sensor variation not learned. That should be there. You need to learn the variation of the crankshaft after you get your engine up and running. Secondly, you'll notice that I unplugged the AFM connector and put it into a 4-cylinder mode. That tests to make sure that the AFM system and all the lifter valley manifold assembly is working like it should. As mentioned earlier, you need to have that plugged in. If that's not plugged in an AFM motor, you will revert to 4-cylinder mode. So you heard it run as a 4-cylinder, a V4 there, for a couple of seconds. This harness has no codes other than crankshaft variation, so it should be good to go.